The other day I was doing my daily Bible reading, as I do, and I came across this text.
A pronouncement against Damascus. Look, Damascus will cease to be a city, and it will become a heap of ruins.
Wait, for real? Damascus is destroyed? Well, fact-checking when you're a Jehovah's Witness is tricky, since the world is in the power of Satan. Satan can obviously influence the media to say whatever he wants them to say. Not even the Smithsonian is safe.
According to the Smithsonian Knowledge Encyclopedia, the Egyptian Sphinx was constructed around 2550 BCE. Well, the problem is with the date, 2550. The global flood occurred about 200 years after that date. So what are the chances that the Sphinx survived the flood? Unless, of course, you think that that's how the Sphinx lost his nose.
So I can't trust apostates, I can't trust the media, I can't even trust the Smithsonian. How am I gonna know for sure if Jehovah destroyed Damascus or not?
All right. How do I? All right.
Yeah, it's here. Damascus is the oldest continuously inhabited city in the world with a massive history. Built around 3,000 years before Christ, it was already as old to Isaiah as London is to us. The city is so old that they keep archaeological findings that are hundreds or thousands of years old as benches. So now that we're here, now that we know for a fact that Damascus is still standing, how do Christians square the circle? Well, basically, they will pick one of two answers. So let's see why both of them are wrong. The first way of explaining away this prophecy of destruction is by saying that the prophecy was already fulfilled way in the past. That's how my cult, Jehovah's Witnesses, explain this prophecy, although you'll need to do a lot of research to find anything they have to say on Isaiah. Surprisingly, despite Jehovah's Witnesses claiming they know all prophecies and how they either were fulfilled or are about to be fulfilled, they don't really care about this prophecy in particular that much. The only thing I was able to find about this prophecy was in the book they wrote about Isaiah's book, Isaiah's Prophecy. And they basically say the prophecy was already fulfilled because the Assyrians conquered the city after that. And they're not the only ones, since this is also what the Mormons believe in. And just as Jehovah's Witnesses, they also use it as proof that you should convert into their religion. This is the easy way out that Christian-based religions take when they don't want to bother explaining this text. It's basically gaslighting you, being like, what? But Damascus was already destroyed and rebuilt off camera. What are you even talking about? They'll be quick to point out that its fulfillment was obviously with the Assyrians who invaded Damascus right as Damascus was trying to invade Israel. The Assyrians ended up conquering Damascus, the prophecy was fulfilled, and no one ever doubted God ever again. Except that's not what happened. Well, not exactly. The Assyrians, although they conquered and pillaged the city, didn't destroy it. The Babylonians reconquered the city just a century later, and Damascus fell to the Persians a century after that, then to the Greeks 2 centuries after that, then to the Romans 3 centuries after that, bringing Damascus into Christian times. And all of those conquerors captured Damascus not because the Assyrians had left the city in ruins and they really valued a lifeless plot of land. They did that because Damascus was a very active and valuable city because of its strategic position that facilitated trade between the East and the West, which allowed it to become a pretty powerful and valuable city that everybody wanted to own, that everybody still wants to own. The Assyrian attack was so inconsequential and matters so little to the overall history of the city that it's barely more than a historical side note and isn't even under the multiple major sieges and captures that Wikipedia has dedicated pages for. Now, what did the prophecy say again? It opens by saying that Damascus would cease to be a city and would become a heap of ruins. What apologists are saying is that Damascus ceased to be a city and became a heap of ruins when the Assyrians conquered the city and didn't destroy it. And this is a great time to revisit why earlier I called Damascus the oldest continuously inhabited city in the world. There's a city that's arguably far older than Damascus. It's so old that it comes up in the biblical narrative a few times. Jericho. Jericho was older than Damascus before being destroyed in the 16th century BCE, which left the city unoccupied until the 9th century BCE when Jericho was rebuilt. And you know why the city was unoccupied? Because it was a heap of ruins and it had ceased to be a city. That's how that looks like. But that is the opposite of what happened to Damascus. Whereas Jericho was destroyed and ceased to be a city, Damascus was conquered and only continued to become more and more valuable. The mere fact that we can call Damascus the oldest continuously inhabited city in the world is already a disproval by itself of Isaiah's prophecy. To some fundamentalists like Jehovah's Witnesses and Mormons, that doesn't matter. Their religion tells them that Damascus was destroyed by the Assyrians, and that is the end of the story. No amount of historical evidence or plain logic will convince them otherwise. However, there are other fundamentalists that see that Damascus wasn't destroyed and take the "it's not a bug, it's a feature" approach. This is a great answer if you're a Christian who wants to believe in the validity of the Bible while still believing in historical facts. They'll tell you that it's not that the prophecy was false, it's just that it hasn't fully come true yet.
And we now come to what I would argue is among the most intriguing prophecies in the Bible concerning Damascus, Syria. And once again, we have another dual prophecy, as it were, in the sense that it would be fulfilled in that day, as well as ultimately fulfilled yet future in the last days. And we are certainly in those last days.
Is the destruction of Damascus. So to me, that's a big deal. I have some of my colleagues and yours to say, well, that's happened in the past. I don't see it as happening in the past. I still see the Isaiah chapter 17 destruction of Damascus coming.
This is how Christians try to have their cake and eat it too. They take the previous explanation to say that Damascus was sacked by Assyrian invaders, but then they hit you with the dual fulfillment power-up that allows them to claim that prophecies obviously have two fulfillments. The one in the past that is kind of shitty and doesn't really fulfill the prophecy, and the one that just so happens to be happening over 2,500 years later. And what do you know it, that's when we live. Some even claim that history shows Damascus has been destroyed many times. Many times, like every time someone attacks the city, that's destroying the city. The author probably still believes Bin Laden destroyed New York. But I'd like to ask, where did they read that this prophecy was going to be fulfilled twice? So many Christians just believe prophecies have dual fulfillments because? Seriously, I've looked into this, and apparently this concept of double fulfillment goes back to the 3rd century, and it just reads like people really wanted to insert themselves into the biblical narrative. There is no biblical reason to believe prophecies will have multiple fulfillments, no matter how hard you try to twist the Bible. So why can't you just say that it's a prophecy that will only be fulfilled in the future? Well, because if this prophecy hasn't been fulfilled already, then it's already wrong. Imagine you're Isaiah living in the 8th century BCE. God tells you that he'll destroy Damascus because of whatever reason, and you tell people so. Then you die and never get to see Damascus destroyed. Your descendants don't get to see Damascus destroyed. Hundreds of years pass, and Damascus, instead of becoming a heap of ruins, becomes one of the most valuable cities in the world. 1,000 years later, it keeps growing as it changes from a Roman influence to a Muslim influence. And now, almost 3,000 years later, after being captured by Romans, by Byzantines, Muslims, Turks, Mongols, Ottomans, after being the center of 100 wars and led by 1,000 leaders, it's not only still a thriving city, but grows to achieve the title as the city that has never fallen. The city that has never become a heap of ruins. The city that proves God wrong every day. As I walked through the streets of Damascus, I couldn't stop thinking about all of this. I couldn't help to look at all of these people and realize that if it was up to God, or many of his fans, these people would not exist. A part of me couldn't help but wonder if all the people I saw were aware that many, including God apparently, are waiting for their destruction. I've read about God destroying cities before, but this is the very first time I was in a city that God had promised to destroy. And the city looked almost wrong to me. When I was a kid and I read about God destroying entire cities, they were always framed as cities where the people were evil. They always looked like this or this. They never looked like this or this or this. Let's read a quick Bible verse.
The Lord said to him,
"Get up, go to the street called Straight, and look for a man named Saul from Tarsus at the house of Judas. For look, he is praying, and in a vision he has seen a man named Ananias come in and lay his hands on him, so that he may recover sight."
Damascus is so not destroyed that this street, Straight Street, still exists today. It's still a street, and in fact, it's a street I'm walking on right now. While I was walking on this street that features on the Bible itself, I began to think about how different this walk would have been just a couple of years ago. As a Christian, this would have felt almost like walking on Holy Land. In fact, walking on the same path that evil sinner Saul walked just before fully converting into Christianism would have probably had a huge effect on me, and may have even pushed me back into Christianism myself. I would have probably been reading Bible verses to my guides and trying to give them a good testimony. But you know what I probably wouldn't have done? I probably wouldn't have walked into this church, the Hananiah church, where Paul's conversion solidified and he was said to be cured of his blindness. Because as a Jehovah's Witness, I was raised to believe that any other religion was despicable and no other religion was more despicable than the Catholics. So I always felt awkward at churches. As a witness, I always wanted to have the experience of praying in a church, but I believed in a God that would condemn me if I did. Now I had the opposite problem. Entering this historical and surprisingly tiny and empty church, I was deeply aware of how now I was free to pray wherever I wanted, but I had no God to pray to. I hadn't prayed in over a year, but I still wanted to know what it felt like to pray at a church. So I went to the front of the church and kneeled in front of the idols. I placed my hands together and I placed my head down while I said my last ever prayer. I prayed not to some divine entity or to the cosmos or to my soul. I prayed to Jehovah. I prayed to the God that I was raised to believe in, the God of the Jehovah's Witnesses, Jehovah of armies, Jehovah God. And I told him how much I had missed him. How hard it has been to deal with my immortality. How horrible it is to see that nothing has a purpose and that there's no big force in the universe who's coming to save us. And how thankful I am to live in a world where I have to worry about those issues instead of living in a world where he existed. By the way, when I was in Damascus, I visited the Umayyad Mosque, one of the holiest places in Islam, and most importantly to me, the home of the reason why Jehovah's Witnesses can't celebrate birthdays. According to tradition, this is John the Baptist's head, who was beheaded as a part of the celebration of someone's birthday, which, if you think about it, really shows how God hates birthdays. Despite it being covered, most Jehovah's Witness children will be able to perfectly picture this head if they've seen this image, which haunted my dreams. Thank you for watching.
All the days and the years, keeping on to achieving things you started destroying. You were testing strength I could not give to see.